Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's a scary story that you know to be completely true? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was a kid, there was a Peeping Tom in the neighborhood, but the weird part is we all knew who he was. A little older guy named Ralph who lived a couple streets over and smoked like a chimney. We knew because he was caught once early on by a neighbor while on their roof, watching them through the skylight. The neighbor had a ladder against the house when doing work earlier that day, but after that he was like a ghost, impossible to catch. People would find footprints and cigarette butts outside windows, smell cigarette smoke, and occasionally see the red cherry of the cigarette glow in the woods. Occasionally angry dads and teenagers who spotted him out in the darkness would give chase, but he moved like a deer through the woods, and no one could put hands on him. The cops were involved a few times, and they dragged him in, but it was never for long, partially, I think, because he had a disabled wife for whom he was the sole carer. He was sort of a neighborhood boogeyman, though thankfully he seemed mostly harmless, if terribly creepy. Many years later, there was a rash of break-ins around the neighborhood. People even joked at the time that it must not be Ralph, because we all figured he had copies of everyone's hide keys already if he wanted to go inside. Side note, we later learned that he definitely did have keys to some houses. Anyway, everyone's guard was up. One night, one of the neighbors heard a commotion outside and ran outside to find a stranger laid out in his driveway, beat to shit. They called 911, and when the police arrived, they were able to identify the guy as someone who had previous arrests for B&E and found items from the previous break-ins in his vehicle nearby, and later at his apartment. As for how he ended up taking a bloody nap in the driveway, he said he was jumped from behind in the dark and never got a good look at the guy. All he remembered for certain was that the guy stunk of cigarette smoke. Responded to a 911 call of a frantic neighbor with a girl that reported her mom was severely injured. Get on the scene and find the ex-boyfriend, knocked on the door at 0300, the young girl recognizing him and let him in. He said, "Thanks, where's your mommy?" She pointed to her bedroom, and he proceeded to stab her multiple times in the face and chest. He then told the daughter, sorry, and slit his own throat. The daughter then ran around the neighborhood, knocking on doors until a neighbor answered and called 911. The amount of blood was insane. One of my elementary school friends ended up working as a gunman for a cartel. He was killed this year in a gunfight with the army. Not really a scary story, but it messes me up every time I give it a thought, just reflecting on how different our paths in life became. I'm actually happy and doing good in life, both emotionally and economically. He, on the other hand, had drug addiction issues, too young, and unfortunately ended up joining with the wrong people in the wrong place. This one is personal. My family and I are staying in a rental house for a few months because my dad was shit with money. This particular house was owned by a fairly wealthy friend of his who was going through a divorce because his wife had developed a long and nasty drug problem. So we're staying there pretty cheap. One night near Christmas, I groggily wake up and see a woman wearing white going through the drawers on the other side of the room. I must have made a sound because she turned and rushed over to me and gently said, "Shh, go back to sleep, little boy." Weirdly, I did. She looked like Liza Manelli, if that's at all relevant. The next morning, I wake up to my parents acting weird, and I hear one of them make a comment like, "I can't tell what's gone and what's not." For some reason, I didn't connect the dots until I was older and never told them what I saw. I thought it was a dream. So yeah, the former crackhead owner of our rental house broke in, probably had a key, and I saw her but didn't do or say shit. I was probably 9 or so. I'll tell a very personally scary one. A good friend of mine from high school was driving his perfectly normal family in their perfectly normal minivan on the highway. They were on vacation headed to Disney World. A pickup coming the other way crossed the center line and hit them head on. He and his 2 sons were killed instantly. His wife and daughter, the youngest child, were critically injured but survived. He was literally one of the 2 or 3 genuinely kindest people I ever met. Got up that morning all set for a fun family adventure, cruising along the highway, and then lights out in an instant. Then his wife or daughter left behind to go it alone. Bad things happen to good people, to anyone, and you don't see them coming. As a parent, that's scary. Worked with kids in foster care. A 17-year-old girl says she's got a secret to tell her CSAA. Now we've got an R SWAT team for this shit because 17-year-old girls in the foster system, 9 out of 10, it's an R. Well, she sits down and tells her family was a cartel, and her cousins were enforcers. One day, when she was like 8, her cousins picked her up and took her out to the desert where they have a 5-year-old boy. They make her choke him to death. I guess he was the kid of a family that owed them money, usually for getting smuggled over. Needless to say, we didn't have a game plan for that shit. The police basically said, no body, no crime. Since we had no actual details to identify on, and the cousins she could name were dead, not in the country or already in prison. Poor kid confessed she was forced to murder a child with her bare hands. And the result was nothing. No justice for her, for the kid, for the family. Just guess shit happens. A year later, she was 18 and out of the system to face a world she knows to be wildly different than how we all claim it to be and work. He's my ex-husband's little brother. He lived with us from 98 to 2004-ish. He murdered his wife in 2009. They only found her torso. He disposed of the rest of her, but for some reason, he had her torso in the trash can on the curb when the cops came. John was much, much nicer than his brother. Super dumb. The crazy, convoluted story he told absolutely sounds like something my ex would come up with. I can't prove it, but I know in my soul that John probably accidentally killed or grievously injured Christian in the fight, panicked, and called his brother instead of calling 911. And Mike told him what to do and what to say. John's dumber than a sack of hair and didn't wipe his ass without consulting his psycho but smarter brother. Mike is intelligent but batshit insane and evil as F. John stuck to the story and will die in prison. His brother changed his name and washed his hands of him. I don't know what really happened that night, but I know that the whole hacksaw dismemberment of wild OJ type story sounds way more like my ex than something John would concoct on his own. I'm only shocked that my ex wasn't the one with a torso in his trash can. A local guy here in this very small rural community was watching Terminator 2 on TV and just snapped. He was angry that his sister was picking on him, got out a gun and killed his mother, sister, and 2 brothers and brother-in-law. He then jumped in the car and fled and was arrested at a homeless shelter a state away a few days later. How did I find out about this? The next morning, I'm out hunting in the woods, full camo with a rifle in hand, walking down a creek bed. Suddenly a helicopter passes overhead, then whips around and comes back. I hear a loudspeaker yell for me to stop and put the gun down. I drop the gun and hit the ground, and I'm freaking out. 15 minutes later, cops come storming down a path, guns drawn. They yelled, "Hey guys, what's going on?" They cleared my gun and checked my ID and saw I wasn't the guy. They told me that they were looking for a guy who just killed his whole family about 10 hours before. It took a few days for him to be spotted and arrested down at the homeless shelter. Our whole small community was pretty much locked down until he was found. That's horrible. I don't think I'm gonna look him up, but that description said enough. I'm surprised I never heard of him. The Vampire of Sacramento, Richard Chase. Paranoid schizophrenic, necrophile, cannibal, spree killer in the 70s. Would only enter people's homes if they were unlocked, as that would be an invitation. Here's an excerpt from the wiki. It's extremely graphic, but still leaves out the worst of what he did. Chase broke into a house and shot Teresa Wallen, 3 months pregnant at the time, 3 times. He then had sexual intercourse with her corpse while stabbing her with a butcher's knife. He then removed multiple organs, cut off one of her nipples, and drank her blood. He used a yogurt container to scoop blood from her chest cavity to drink it. He stuffed dog feces from Wallen's yard down her throat before leaving. 4 days later, he entered a 38-year-old woman's home, shot her friend in the head, then her 6-year-old son, and 22-month-old nephew. He drank their blood and violated their corpses. When a visitor knocked on the door, it startled him, and he fled, taking the 22-month-old body with him. The headless body wasn't found for months. Chase was finally tracked down and caught trying to flee his apartment. Searching his apartment, it was soaked in blood from floor to ceiling. The kitchen, refrigerator, and all his dishes and silverware. There were human brains in a dish in the refrigerator. He was deemed fit for trial, got the death penalty, but was able to cheat his antidepressants and committed suicide. A friend of mine drives an 18-wheeler tanker truck, and he was on some highway in Ohio or Illinois or somewhere in the winter that was infamous for icing over. He was northbound, and one of the cars from the southbound side lost control on the ice and went across the median and right in front of him. He had no chance to get out of the way or slow down. It was a woman driving with her 18-month-old daughter in the back. The impact killed them both instantly. The worst part is that the husband or father was in another car following them and had to watch his wife and daughter die without being able to do anything about it. My friend had to go to therapy for a while after that, and I'm still not sure he's even gotten past it. My family literally had a party to die for. We hosted a super late Christmas party in March. We invited a few neighbors over, including an older couple, beyond a few weird comments from the old husband like, "I'm so glad I could have one last good meal." We all had a good time. Everyone kept telling us how great the party and food were. Eventually, the old couple goes home a bit earlier than the rest of the guests, and we don't think anything of it. About an hour later, as another guest was about to leave, they come rushing back into the house, yelling about police and medics on our street. Turns out, the husband of the old couple simply dropped dead about 30 minutes after they got home. I guess, to be fair, a big talking point at the party was how he was already basically on his last leg thanks to health conditions. And it was only a matter of time, but we didn't think it'd be that soon. Worked at a pizza place in a small town. Had this lady come in every Friday and get 2 pizzas for her family, 2 kids. One Friday, she comes in like normal, seems normal, chit-chat normal, grabs the pizza and heads out. Less than an hour later, she stabbed her 2 kids and husband to death, decapitated them, and when the police arrived, tried to decapitate herself. In jail, she somehow was able to get something sharp and stabbed herself several times, but still survived. Not sure what came of the trial and what not after I had moved, but yeah, it was wild. Super nice lady I saw every week, just snapped, I guess. When I was 13 or 14, I got into a play-by-post role-playing game. It was on the forum section of the official Harry Potter website, LMAO. Not that we would RP as students or anything. It was all made-up characters and took place in a bar. The leader of the group was a very talented writer. We got to talking OOC and eventually linked up on MSN Messenger. He was the first internet friend I made. We found out we both were from Minnesota and not too far from each other, but had never met in person. I got to know him very well over 2 years. He was a year older than me, but was an extremely talented guy. Very well spoken, well read on topics I wasn't even thinking about at that age, and made very impressive flash animations. Stick death was big around then, so it was stuff like that. He lived with his grandmother because his mom was a drunk and his dad was dead. He talked about being bullied at school, his shit home life, etc. I remember once he said he told his grandma that he wanted to kill himself and that her only response was to do it outside so he doesn't make a mess of the house. We talked a lot and got to know each other really well over our friendship. He'd disappear occasionally for a week or 2 at a time because of his depression, but would always pop back up until he didn't. Breaking news was all over the TV one afternoon. There was a school shooting in the town he lived in. I immediately knew who the shooter was. well before the news announced it. He killed his grandpa and his grandpa's girlfriend, fellow students, teachers, and then himself. The FBI came to my house in the weeks following and questioned me, but I didn't know his plans to do that. They took my computer to examine our interactions. I grieved him privately, but he's forever going to be a school shooter. That's the scariest thing I've ever been involved in. I was living in a high-rise on the 15th floor. Got home from morning yoga just as the sun had risen, and there's an ambulance and fire truck in the drive, but no lights or sirens. I get into the lobby to take the elevator up to my floor, and I overhear a cop on his cell phone saying, "Nobody knows where he fell or jumped from." Okay, so being the morbid creature I am, I immediately go up to my place and out onto the balcony. I'm scanning the pool deck and don't see anything until I look directly down and see a man that's clearly been dead for a few hours just staring back up at me. Not as much blood as you would suspect. A few weeks later, I ran into one of the building employees and asked if he knew what had happened. He showed me the security footage of the guy falling to his death. I guess he was living a few floors directly below me, same floor plan and balcony. He had gone out drinking with some buddies to celebrate a recent promotion. Footage showed his friends leaving his place around 2. Around 2:20, he went out onto his balcony and, for some unknown reason, stood on a table, which tripped and out from under him, and he fell backwards over the railing about 6 stories onto the pool deck. He was spotted by a couple a few floors below him when they went out onto their balcony to have coffee and watch the sunrise. Poor guy died on impact and laid out there for like 4 hours. My brother and I were out back racing on rollerblades outside our apartment complex down the alley to the street. He beat me there, and when I arrived, he was talking to a stranger who was walking on the sidewalk. My brother looks at me and says, "Let's go ask Mom, come on," and rushes inside, to which I quickly follow. My brother begins to beg my mom to go help this guy find his lost puppy. We follow our mom outside, and this guy is nowhere to be seen. A week later, the neighbor kid at the house just across the street was abducted. His little brother was playing in the front yard. A car drove up and got the little boy to come up to the window to talk. The guy tried to grab the little boy and pull him into the car. The older brother ran up, fought off the attacker, only to be pulled into the car himself. He was only 10 years old. The kidnapper was Joseph Edward Duncan, a convicted serial killer. Chilling to think it could have been my brother instead. Teach your kids not to talk to strangers, and if they do, always come get you before going anywhere with them. The chances are slim, but it's a sick world, and it could quite possibly save their lives. A really popular athlete that I went to school with got married to his high school sweetheart and had 3 kids. He also was having an affair with a woman from Sweden. She apparently convinced him to kill his entire family. He was on some kind of antidepressants at the time, and not acting like himself. After he killed his family, he flew to Sweden and killed the woman he was having the affair with. He then shot himself. It was the craziest thing I had ever heard, but so scary at the same time. I knew the guy. I grew up with him, and he had good parents and a nice childhood. Scary to think what made him turn into a monster.